Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Please make your way to your seats. The program is about to begin.
Hey, one last thing. And I want everyone's eyes on me when I say this. Look at me.
Governor? Can I, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, can I invite you all, please, to take your seats. Governor again. I declare open the 2023 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, convened under the auspices of the General Assembly, SDG Summit, and I call to order the first plenary meeting. Heads of state and government, Secretary General, President of the Social and Economic Council, Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. I am honored to welcome you all to the SDG Summit at this critical juncture. As representatives are aware, this forum is held pursuant to General Assembly Resolutions 67/290 of 9th July 2013 and 75/290B of 25th June 2021. Before proceeding further, I first invite the forum to turn to the consideration of Agenda Item 2 and the consideration of its provisional agenda as contained in Document A/HLPF/2023/1. May I take it that the forum wishes to adopt the agenda as contained in Document A/HLPF/2023/1. I see no objection. It is so decided. I recall that pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 67/290, the meetings of the forum convened under the auspices of the General Assembly shall operate under the rules of procedure of the main committees of the Assembly. I should now like to draw to the attention of representatives Agenda Item 3 concerning election of officers other than the chair. In accordance with paragraph 6C of General Assembly Resolution 67/290, the meetings of the forum under the auspices of the Assembly will be chaired by its president. May I take it that the forum decides to elect the 21 vice chairs of the General Assembly at its 78th session as vice chairs of the forum. I see no objection. It is so decided. I further draw the attention of the forum to the letter of the President of the General Assembly at its 77th session, dated 17th July 2023, by which participating states were invited to express the interest of their head of state or government to serve as a co-moderator for a leaders' dialogue. In this connection, I am pleased to inform the Forum that I have appointed as co-moderators for Leaders Dialogue 1, Her Excellency Katalin Novak, President of Hungary, and His Excellency Kasim Jomart Tokayev, President of the Republic of Kazakhstan. For Leaders Dialogue 2, His Excellency Andrzej Duda, President of the Republic of Poland, and His Excellency Philip J. Pierre, Prime Minister of St. Lucia. For Leaders Dialogue 3, His Excellency William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, and Her Excellency Nataša Pirc Musar, President of the Republic of Slovenia. For Leaders Dialogue 4, His Excellency Mark Brown, Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, and Her Excellency Mette Frederiksen, Prime Minister of Denmark. For Leaders Dialogue 5, Her Excellency Katrin Jakobsdottir, Prime Minister of Iceland, and His Excellency Philippe Jacinto Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique. And for Leaders Dialogue 6, His Excellency Macky Sall, President of the Republic of Senegal, and His Excellency Ulf Kristersson, Prime Minister of Sweden. I thank them for taking on this important role and wish all participants every success in the deliberations. In accordance with the program of work, Leaders Dialogue 1 will begin at 10:30 a.m. in the Trusteeship Council chamber. There will be a short overlap with the plenary meeting so that all group statements can be heard. Allow me now to deliver my opening statement from the rostrum. Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Ms. Paula Narvaez, President of the Economic and Social Council, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and guests. It is an honor to welcome you to the 2023 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, the SDG Summit. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted unanimously by all United Nations member states in 2015, constitutes a global call to action to banish poverty from our societies, protect and preserve our planet, and to ensure prosperity for all. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals serve as a beacon of hope and a roadmap for common action to create a more equitable, more just, and more sustainable world. Now, at the midway point, it is essential that we take stock of our progress and assess the remaining challenges that confront us. Such assessment is a necessary basis for charting a course of success to ensure that we, the United Nations, keep faith with the bold undertaking we gave to the world in 2015, that no one is left behind. Today's summit therefore provides a unique platform for us to recommit to the 2030 agenda. I therefore encourage you to use this opportunity for peer learning, to share your experiences, forge partnerships, and put forth innovative ideas that can help drive meaningful change. However, let us be clear, Excellencies. A combination of factors, including the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, impacts of climate change, and the war in Ukraine, have presented a series of complex and intersecting crises. And while this has dramatically altered the trajectory of the entire world, it is, as is too often the case, those in the most precarious circumstances who are already most vulnerable suffer the most. This includes countries in special situations, small island developing states, least developed countries, and landlocked developing countries. The most vulnerable in our communities, including women and girls, young people, persons with disabilities, older persons, and indigenous people, have not been spared and are at the foremost receiving end of these crises. Despite commitments to eradicate poverty and to reduce hunger being at the core of this agenda, alarmingly, 1.2 billion people were still living in multidimensional poverty as of 2022. It is estimated that approximately 8% of global population, or 680 million people, will still be facing hunger in 2030. Can we accept these numbers? Or, because they make us uncomfortable, should we pretend they do not exist and carry on with business as usual? Surely we cannot. To do so would amount to being reckless. Rather, we must do more to lift people sustainably out of poverty and hunger, not merely because it is the right thing to do in the name of humanity, but also because to do nothing would be to fan the flames of discord and conflict with well-known terrible consequences. Excellencies, while there have been setbacks, we cannot relent in our resolve and determination to do our utmost to rescue the SDGs, as we have been challenged by the Secretary General. The fact that we are lagging in our promise cannot be the death knell of our blueprint, nor should this summit be a forum to point fingers, apportion blame, and certainly not to accept defeat. Instead, bold and transformative actions must be prioritized to support the well-being of our global constituents, particularly those left farthest behind. This is our moment to rededicate ourselves to the SDGs and to reinvigorate progress across the entirety of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report outlines clear steps in that regard. It recommends an ambitious SDG push scenario to improve social protection, strengthen governance, promote a green economy, and address digital disruption while improving access to quality education and healthcare in a human rights setting. With concerted, ambitious action, it is still possible that by 2030, we could lift 124 million additional people out of poverty and ensure that some 113 million fewer people are malnourished. Such achievements would also generate gains across the other goals related to health, nutrition, and education. Adequate investment in the SDGs is therefore a win-win for all, with cross-cutting and knock-on benefits reverberating across the globe, positively impacting every society and every community. Excellencies, I urge you to make this strategic investment in the SDGs through effective domestic resource mobilization, accompanied by fulfillment of the targets set for the inflow of official development assistance and productive partnerships with the private sector. We must reform the international financial architecture to promote affordable, stable, long-term financing for sustainable development across the global south, where development has been in perpetual deficit. The Financing for Development Dialogue and the Summit of the Future are both key opportunities to continue pushing this reform agenda, bearing in mind the urgent need to address the worsening gap for financing the SDGs. Excellencies, by delivering meaningful change to the lives of so many, we can demonstrate that the UN not only hears the demands of those in difficult situations, but more importantly, that these needs will not go unmet. Renewed faith in us by the many who depend on us will help to restore our credibility, trust, and ultimately a sense of confidence that UN-led multilateralism delivers. We must remember the world is watching. Our 8 billion constituents are looking to us for a signal that we will keep our promises and that we are alive to the reality that we have only 7 years left before 2030. They want and deserve full reassurance that we altogether recognize the circumstantial setbacks that so many have experienced and continue to endure, and that we stand ready to support them in their time of acute need. And most importantly, that we see the heightened sense of urgency and we are all prepared as world leaders gather here today to raise our ambition and recommit to meaningfully delivering the 2030 Agenda and its 17 SDGs. With that in mind, I challenge you all to demonstrate emboldened leadership by using this summit to announce groundbreaking commitments to support and to complete the 2030 Agenda. I call for your support to the political declaration, negotiations for which were skillfully led by Qatar and Ireland, to whom I extend my grateful thanks and that of the membership. I sincerely believe that the declaration represents the most ideal common denominator for the overwhelming majority of members. Adoption of a strong declaration at this summit will herald the start of a new phase of accelerated progress to achieve the SDGs by 2030. As we navigate the challenges ahead, the SDGs will remain a true blueprint for humanity and will continue to be our guideposts to deliver peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all peoples everywhere. As the late former Secretary General Kofi Annan once said, we must work tirelessly to achieve a better world that is free from fear and free from want. I thank you. It is now my honor to invite His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, to deliver a statement.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 8 years ago, Member States gathered in the hall to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals. With the world watching, including 193 young people in the balcony holding blue lamps of hope, you made a solemn promise. A promise to build a world of health, progress, and opportunity for all. A promise to leave no one behind. And a promise to pay for it. This was not a promise made to one another as diplomats from the comfort of this chamber. It was always a promise to people. People crushed under the grinding wheels of poverty. People starving in a world of plenty. Children denied a seat in a classroom. Families fleeing conflict, seeking a better life. Parents watching helplessly as their children die of preventable disease. People losing hope because they can't find a job or a safety net when they need it. Entire communities literally on devastation's doorstep because of changing climate. So the SDGs aren't just a list of goals. They carry the hopes, dreams, rights, and expectations of people everywhere. And they provide the surest path to living up to our obligations under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, now in its 75th year. Yet today, only 15% of the targets are on track, and many are going in reverse. Instead of leaving no one behind, we risk leaving the SDGs behind. So, Excellencies, the SDGs need a global rescue plan. And I'm deeply encouraged by the detailed and wide-ranging draft political declaration under consideration here today, especially its commitment to improving developing countries' access to the fuel required for SDG progress, finance. This includes clear support for an SDG stimulus of at least $500 billion a year, as well as an effective debt relief mechanism that supports payment suspensions, longer lending terms, and lower rates. It includes a call to recapitalize and change the business model of multilateral development banks so they can massively leverage private finance at affordable rates to benefit developing countries. And it includes the endorsement of the need to reform the international financial architecture that I consider outdated, dysfunctional, and unfair. This can be a game changer in accelerating SDG progress. I have been calling for a new Bretton Woods moment and the development of practical solutions by the Summit of the Future next September. But countries can act right now to get the SDGs on track. Together with businesses and financial institutions, local authorities, the UN development system, and more, you have helped point the way with high-impact initiatives to support 6 targeted areas where urgent transitions are needed. First, we must take action on hunger. In our world of plenty, hunger is a shocking stain on humanity and an epic human rights violation. It is an indictment of every one of us that millions of people are starving in this day and age. Building on July's Food Systems Summit stocktake, we are marshalling finance, science, data, innovations, and policy and governance support to help countries transform food systems so all people can access a healthy and nutritious diet. Second, the transition to renewable energy isn't happening fast enough. We are putting forward new energy compacts in which governments, businesses, and global organizations join forces to invest in decarbonizing energy systems and ensuring a just and equitable transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Third, the benefits and opportunities of digitalization are not being spread widely enough. To close the divide, we have launched an initiative to spur digital transformation across 100 countries, supporting stronger technology capacities, better governance, and innovative financing. Our proposed Global Digital Compact will also help countries build safe digital systems that provide internet access for all, including students in hard-to-reach communities.
Fourth, too many children and young people are victims of poor quality education or receive no education at all. We need to build true learning societies anchored in quality education, including lifelong learning from the earliest years to adulthood, closing the digital divide and supporting teachers every step of the way. An emerging group of front-runner countries is leading the way in boosting investment and transforming education systems around the world. Fifth, people need decent work and social protection. Working with governments and the private sector, our global accelerator on jobs and social protection for just transitions aims to create 400 million new decent jobs, especially in the green, care, and digital economies, and extend social protection to over 4 billion people. Investments in social protection should be massively increased. And sixth, the war on nature must stop. We must end the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. We're building a group of champion countries to explore how to reform economic policies and put nature and biodiversity at the heart of all decision-making. Cutting across all of these transitions is the need to ensure full gender equality. It's long past the time to end discrimination, to ensure a place at every table for women and girls, and to end the scourge of gender-based violence. Excellencies, at the halfway point to the SDG deadline, the eyes of the world are on you once again. Over the course of the weekend, young people and civil society groups came to the UN or marched in communities around the world demanding urgent action. Now is the time to prove that you are listening. We can prevail if we act now, if we act together, if we keep our promise to the billions of people whose hopes, dreams, and futures you hold in your hands. Now is the time. Thank you very much.
I thank the Secretary General for his statement. I now invite Her Excellency Paola Narvaez, President of the 2024 session of the Economic and Social Council, to deliver a statement.
Señor Presidente de la Asamblea.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, Honourable Heads of State and Government, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Halfway into the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, as we know, we have stalled, and in many cases, we are reversing progress on the SDGs. The planet continues to be devastated by the impacts of climate change. The increased severity and frequency of disasters make recovery challenging for all, and especially those vulnerable peoples and countries. At the same time, the international financial architecture is struggling to respond and adapt to the current moment of crisis. Countries already under debt distress have been further crippled due to the economic and financial tolls of pandemic recovery and climate disasters. The growing digital divide is intensifying inequalities, and particularly gender inequality, which continues to undermine our progress. Realising gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls will make a crucial contribution to progress across all the goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda. Women and girls must benefit from equal access to quality education, to economic resources, and to political participation, as well as the same opportunities for employment, leadership, and decision-making at all levels. We are seeing multiple crises that pose further threats to sustainable development, and yet we must find a way to be optimistic in advancing the achievement of the SDGs and strengthening our collective resolve to work towards the ideals that sustainable development offers to our peoples and to our planet. Today is a day where we are all resolved to commit. The political declaration is testimony to the unshakable commitment of our leaders to the effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs, and the defence of all of the principles enshrined in it. It recognises our collective need to take immediate action vis-à-vis the 17 goals. We are very much looking forward to its adoption to guide our efforts for implementation over the next few years. At the same time, the high-level dialogue on financing for development will focus on the need to benefit from an international financial architecture that is able to respond both to our current needs as well as to the challenges that we see on the horizon. Lastly, the Climate Ambition Summit presents an opportunity to make decisive progress on climate action and to raise the bar for more timely and targeted efforts. This week should serve as a turning point to rescue the SDGs. We must not let this moment slip away. As President of the Economic and Social Council, I commit to using the 2024 session to leverage the outcomes of the SDG Summit, as well as the outcomes of the other high-level meetings that will be held this week. The Economic and Social Council, with its various segments, fora and subsidiary bodies, stands ready to support countries' efforts to turn commitments into actions, to make the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development a reality. The Council will aim to provide transformative policy guidance while also strengthening its role as the accountability platform for better to ensure that the UN development system is better and more agile. Ultimately, we must all make a full commitment, engage in constructive dialogue and raise our ambitions, including the important participation and vision of civil society and other stakeholders. This is the only way that we will be able to make sure that the transformations required happen. The strength of multilateralism can guide us towards a way of cooperating during these times of crisis, and I am looking forward to hearing your different innovative ideas and your commitments to action over the next few days. And I am very grateful to be part of this transformation that will make sustainable development not only our goal, but also our reality. Thank you very much.
I thank the President of the Economic and Social Council for his statement. The Forum will now consider Agenda Item 4, entitled Adoption of the Political Declaration of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. The Forum has before it document A/HLPF/2023/L1, containing a draft resolution entitled Political Declaration of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, convened under the auspices of the General Assembly. Before proceeding to action, I wish to recall that, in accordance with paragraph 6D of General Assembly Resolution 67/290, the meetings of the Forum shall result in a concise, negotiated political declaration to be submitted for the consideration of the Assembly. I would like to thank all states for their constructive participation in the complex negotiations on the draft political declaration. The Forum shall now proceed to consider draft resolution A/HLPF/2023/L1. The Forum will now take a decision on draft resolution A/HLPF/2023/L1 entitled Political Declaration of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, convened under the auspices of the General Assembly. May I take it that the Forum wishes to adopt the draft political declaration contained in document A/HLPF/2023/L1, which, pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 67/290, I will then submit for the formal consideration of the Assembly. I hear no objection. The draft political declaration is adopted. Pursuant to Assembly Resolution 67/290, I will submit the political declaration just adopted for the consideration of the Assembly. I thank the co-facilitators of the draft political declaration, His Excellency Fergal Maithen, Permanent Representative of Ireland to the United Nations, and Her Excellency Alia Ahmed Saif Al Thani, Permanent Representative of the State of Qatar to the United Nations, for conducting open, transparent, and inclusive consultations, and their steadfast stewardship of the process. I also wish to thank my predecessor, the President of the General Assembly, at its 77th session, His Excellency Chaba Korosi, for his hard and insightful work on the political declaration. I now invite His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdullah Rahman bin Jassim Al Thani, Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar, to make a statement.
In the name of Allah, most merciful, most compassionate, Your Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, the President of the 78th session of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished attendees, it gives me pleasure to participate in the opening session of the SDG Summit, which represents a good opportunity to revive hope in the implementation of the SDGs of 2030. I would like to welcome the adoption of the summit's political declaration. It is a pleasure that Her Excellency Sheikha Alia bint Ahmed Al Thani, the permanent representative of Qatar to the United Nations, has been entrusted with the responsibility of facilitating government negotiations on the political declaration in cooperation with His Excellency, the permanent representative of Ireland to the United Nations. We are gathered here at this very critical moment in the implementation of SDGs, where we share one goal, addressing the most urgent challenges facing the world: armed conflicts, food security crises, and climate change. Needless to say, commitment to peaceful settlement of differences and respectful dialogue are best to safeguard the development gains worldwide. Therefore, we must give priority to the implementation of effective procedures and measures as per the international law to remove the difficulties hindering the right of self-determination for those living under foreign occupation, including the Palestinian people. It is also crucial to avoid any steps that would undermine the ability of developing countries to implement sustainable development goals, including imposing coercive measures in a manner contrary to the United Nations Charter and the principles of international law. Mr. President, in this occasion, we should assert that investment in the future of our youth falls to all of us, and by appreciating the opinions of youth, empowering women and girls and involving them in decision-making, we can build more inclusive and sustainable communities. The vital role played by the State of Qatar in development worldwide, especially in education, enhances the vision of the state in human development. We are committed to supporting the implementation of the Doha Programme of Action for the Least Developing Countries, recognizing the challenges facing these countries. The State of Qatar is committed to the alignment of its national development plans with the Sustainable Development Goals principles. Qatar has made the climate change a top priority and has taken important measures to develop the relevant techniques. Mr. President, in the end, let us remember that the pathway to build a new world that is safer, more equitable, and free is through achieving international human solidarity. Together, we can turn our commitments to action and turn the 2030 agenda into reality. Thank you very much.
I thank the Prime Minister and the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar for his statement. I next invite His Excellency Leo Varadkar, Taoiseach of Ireland, to make a statement.
President of the General Assembly, Heads of State and Government, Secretary General, Excellencies, dear friends. As we stand here together, halfway to our deadline of 2030, there's no hiding the fact that we're not where we would wish to be. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are an urgent and universal call to action to end poverty, to protect the planet, and to improve the lives and prospects of everyone, everywhere on our world. And yet at this midpoint, we know that only about 15% of our targets are being met. Yes, our efforts have been pushed off track by a global pandemic, by conflict, including Russia's invasion of Ukraine, by food and energy crises, and by the increasing pace and intensity of extreme weather events linked to climate change. But we should also acknowledge that progress had stalled before the pandemic arrived. As leaders, our drive to achieve the goals has not been as strong or as focused as it should have been. We've lost time, but I, for one, have not lost hope. Saying that we've not made as much progress as we should have is not the same as saying we haven't made any progress at all. As the 2023 SDG report says, more than 800 million people around the world have been connected to electricity since 2015. That's a huge number of people, greater than the entire population of Europe. 146 countries have already met or are on track to meeting the under 5 mortality target. And effective HIV treatment has halved global AIDS-related deaths since 2010. And as the Secretary-General said earlier this year, this progress shows that change is possible, that backsliding is not inevitable, that poverty, pollution, and gender inequality are not preordained. They are trends that can be reversed, problems that can be solved, tragedies that can be averted. But only if we act now with the urgency and unity that the situation demands. As the political declaration states, the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs represent our best hope for humanity and the planet. In it, we, the world's leaders, commit ourselves to bold, accelerated, just and transformative actions, anchored in international solidarity and effective cooperation to create a sustainable future for all. It must be more than a piece of paper that we adopt today. Rather, it is our responsibility as leaders to breathe life into it and to make it real. Mr. President, Ireland was proud to play a role in co-facilitating drafting of our declaration with Qatar. The negotiations were not easy because the stakes are so high and the implications for the world so profound. And on Ireland's behalf, I'm glad to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the 2030 Agenda and to the achievement of all of our goals. We'll play our part in ensuring the world's poorest and most vulnerable are not forgotten or left behind. We're committed to providing official development assistance to the most vulnerable people in the world, and we've consistently increased our ODA in recent years against an increasingly difficult backdrop for international development budgets. Since the SDGs were adopted in 2015, official development assistance by Ireland has trebled when you include the assistance we're offering those fleeing the war in Ukraine. And we're committed to continuing this trend in the years ahead. We're on track to meet our pledge to provide at least $225 million annually in climate finance for developing countries within 2 years. And this year alone, we'll provide $149 million for climate finance. To deal with the scandalous food security and nutrition crisis globally, Ireland will provide almost $300 million towards food, agriculture, and nutrition this year, and we do so recalling our own great famine of the 19th century. And we will increase this budget further next year. Mr. President, Ireland is a small country of only 5 million people, but we've always been part of the world and dared to think big. The challenge of achieving the sustainable development goals, is undoubtedly an enormous one, but with effort and persistence, we can and will succeed. Thank you very much.
I thank the Taoiseach of Ireland for his statement. I now invite the forum to view a video presentation on the stakeholder engagement in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
Dear friends, this week, this weekend, this house, the United Nations, also belongs to you.
It's possible when we act.
With urgency.
For everyone, everywhere.
Decisions have to be taken now. Our planet, our society, peace, partnerships cannot wait.
As an entrepreneur, it is extremely challenging to access capital, especially if you're women and especially if you're youth.
People are asking tough questions. The young people were like, we are not here for just talking points. We are here for solutions. We are here for accountability. You say you will do this, but who will hold you accountable?
What we need now is for global leaders to act more, to really scale up what civil society can do to ensure that civic space is not closing and that our expertise are being centered in all decision making.
We have to ensure by 2030 that women, girls, LGBTI populations live safely, equally throughout the world.
We need more faith from policymakers and from financial institutions that we can do it.
You need to see young people as not just beneficiaries, but as equal partners.
It's possible when we fight against poverty. It's possible to achieve climate justice when people affected are present in decision-making areas.
If we scale the digital solutions that are already out there.
When we respect all human rights.
Let there be, let there be.
Fossil fuels have got to go. If we don't act together, we are just gonna destroy the planet and ourselves.
80% of the world's biodiversity is in indigenous peoples' territories. If we are able to get our rights respected and protected, then we can contribute.
It's possible when we all feel responsible. I do.
When we include young people at the table.
When we all think globally, but act locally.
It's possible when you don't leave me behind.
It is possible when we act. When you act.
When you act, you act.
When you act. With urgency.
For everyone, everywhere.
I now invite the youth representative, Ms. Mayada Adil from Sudan, young leader for the SDGs, to make a statement.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today, I stand here not only as Mayada Adil, but also as a young Sudanese woman and activist, carrying the power of my people with me. I'm one of the 17 young leaders for SDGs recognized by United Nations. We just came from the SDG Action Weekend, where youth, women, civil society, private sector, science and academia, and local government had shown we are ready and willing to take action rather than promises from you. As we mark the midpoint of the 2030 agenda, I have to remind you that if only 15% of the Sustainable Development Goals are met, that is a failure. We are facing a dire reality, the climate crisis, persisting hunger, growing inequality, and multiple conflicts plaguing our world. So, as we gather to recommit to the SDGs and ignite actions, I invite you to look in this room and to look around you and tell me, what do you see? I tell you what I see. I see a hall filled with head of states, decision makers, and power holders. But I do not see my tribe, the youth tribe, the one who've been left behind. Every year, you invite a different young person to this stage to remind you of your commitment to humanity. Last year, there were young people from Afghanistan, Ukraine, Uganda, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Argentina. Today, it's only me standing in front of you, and I have a big shoes to fill as I remind you again of the many promises that you have made and to keep you accountable for the actions and inactions. Therefore, I will ask you, what have you done to include young people in decision-making space? Half of the world population is under 30, yet we are excluded, sidelined from all decision-making spaces. Less than 3% of the members of the parliament are under 30, and less than 1% if we speak about young women only. Once we stop making excuses and creating roadblocks for the young people to co-lead, real transformational change will happen, and I can assure you that. But not as tokenism, through genuine intergenerational partnership and solidarity. We need young people in all our diversity to be seen, to be heard in the policy and decision-making. What have you done to Afghan women and girls? Last year, in the same stage, a young Afghan woman highlighted the ongoing crisis in her country. At the time, women or girls were banned from schools. Many hearts were touched, and promises were made. But since then, the situation had only got worse. Now women or girls are banned from basic education, attending university, and participating in public life in general. You have not done enough to solve this crisis and put pressure on the people who are responsible. So I stand here in solidarity with my sisters, the Afghan sisters. What have you done to make the international system more inclusive and responsive? In this case, I'm talking about Sudan, my country. We have witnessed the global humanitarian financial system focusing its aid towards the global north, leaving the global south facing hunger, droughts, climate crisis, and increased conflicts and wars. Sudan is left out of your sight. I wonder why. Today's generation of young people is around 1.9 billion strong, but millions of us are frankly being left behind. As we speak, 1 in every 5 young people worldwide, not in education or employment or trainings. 68 million young people are looking for jobs. All over the world, millions of young people are unable to access social protection coverage. Mental health problems like depression and anxiety are a serious concern for young people. And if you do not deliver on your commitments to keeping the global emission below 1.5 degrees, reversing the damages of the climate change, and working on carbon-free alternative, you are putting the lives and the future, our entire generation, and those who will come at risk. We are the young people of the world, demanding you, the leaders of the world, to fulfill your obligations towards peace and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And we are ready to work with you as a full-fledged partners to make it reality. Thank you so much.
I thank Ms. Adil for her statement. I now invite the forum to hold a setting the stage discussion on SDG implementation at the halftime. What will it take to keep the SDG promise? I am pleased to welcome the distinguished panelists and invite them to assume their seats on the podium. The panelists are Her Excellency Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados and co-chair of the Sustainable Development Goals Advocates Group, Mr. Ajay Banga, President of the World Bank Group, and Ms. Caroline Corsi, Mayor of Montevideo. Furthermore, I am pleased to welcome the moderator, Ms. Gillian Tett of the Financial Times. Following the Setting the Stage segment, we will hear a musical performance by Senegalese musician Mr. Baba Mal, UN Goodwill Ambassador for the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. I now invite Ms. Tett to conduct the discussion.
Well, thank you very much indeed, President, for convening this. And on behalf of the Financial Times, I am delighted to be here for this very important meeting. Now, if the SDGs were a game of soccer or football, which is something that unites the world, a love of soccer, right now at halftime, we would all be feeling pretty depressed. Because as we've heard earlier, only 15% of the goals have been met, and that is not a good record. But the great thing about soccer is that it can always change in the second half. So what today is all about is trying to see whether we can actually find ways to change the game in the second half. Let's hope we can, otherwise the crowd are going to truly start booing. So we have an amazing combination of people here to talk about this. We are short of time, so we are going to be very focused and brief. But I'd like to start with you, Mia Motley. One of the key elements of changing the game is getting the finance needed to actually implement the SDGs. You have been a tireless thorn in the side of the rich countries and the international financial architecture calling for change. What, in your view, would count as success from this week in terms of getting the international financial architecture changed?
I think we have to, first of all, thank you for having us here. I think we have to recognize that the calls for international reform of the financial system really are not just about governance, but they're for us about longer money, cheaper money, and being able to use it for the purposes for which we need to reduce all of our inequalities and to achieve the elements of the SDGs. Ajay is better placed to speak to it, but I'm hoping that we can have a joint effort between the World Bank, the IMF in particular, and the UN to be able to bring to the table the credit rating agencies and the markets, because regrettably we value short-term lending, but do not understand that if countries are going to invest in education and healthcare, they need 30 and 40-year money in order to be able to do so. Our situation has been compounded by the pandemic, and therefore that long-term money is critical. Secondly, we need mission-oriented lending. Professor Mazzucato has been making this point, and in fact, in Barbados, we've set 6 missions, recognizing that all of our policies, including the terms and conditions for access to finance, have to reinforce the missions. If we believe that the SDGs are worth attaining, then we need to put a framework in place that allows the MDBs to value the SDGs and to be able to increase the length of time that you can have to repay for these funds. Thirdly, we need to ensure that as we do all of that, that we get countries and individuals to see the SDGs as individual targets. Because it is not only about the money that we access, it is also about the policies, it's also about the change of behavior, it's about the change of attitude. The reason why the Secretary General can speak about there being an abundance of food and people starving is because we choose not to act differently and we choose not to share with one another. So I believe that those 3 points are critical. Let us get the meetings with the credit rating agencies and the markets, and Ajay, I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on it, because you cannot continue to value short-term lending. You cannot continue to have metrics that don't support a move away from per capita GDP that is historic and tells us nothing about the country, while the vulnerability of the country increases exponentially.
Right, well, thank you very much indeed for those strong words. Very briefly, a one-word answer. Are you more encouraged than you were 3 months ago?
I believe that this man has scored a century in his first 100 days. and I say so as one who has been a major critic of the World Bank. I think that the course correction that he has brought has been critical, but I say to him, if we are running fast and the dog behind us is running faster than us, we'll still get bitten. So I hope that he recognizes now that pace and scope are still the order of the day. And in fairness, it's not him. It's us, the countries. He is simply the agent that is going to carry out our wishes. But at the end of the day, I want to make the point that we cannot have SDGs for the benefit of global public goods and not have a mechanism for financing global public goods. And I still believe that the World Bank is the best place to locate the financing of global public goods, but I accept that there may not be enough public money. And to that extent, how do we mobilize money that now goes in non-state actors, most of whose balance sheets, the major multinational corporations have balance sheets that dwarf and miniaturize the majority of countries in this room. So we have to find a way of them contributing to the financing of global public goods. And we also have to find a way of philanthropic capital financing global public goods. They want to do good, but it can't only be what they want, it has to be what the world needs.
Well, thank you. Well, we've had mixed sporting metaphors here. I think we should definitely make time for some applause and cheers here. We've had mixed sporting metaphors. I started with soccer. We then had cricket. Those of you who are not cricket fans, century means scoring 10 goals. Ajay Banga, you come from a land of cricket and, well, mostly cricket, some soccer too. How do you see the current situation? We've just heard from Mia Motley that you have changed the game. Would you agree?
Well, I think the first thing you've got to know is the last time I was with Mia on a stage, we were in a rock concert in Paris. So you guys don't compare to that experience, right? But all seriousness, I've spent 100 days in this job. I would like to tell you the 5 or 6 things I'm trying to work on, which go towards addressing some of the things that came up in the previous speeches, but also Mia's points. And the first thing that I'm trying to work on is to be clear on expanding the vision of the bank to not only focus on poverty and prosperity, although those are key to our future, but to recognize the intertwined nature of the challenges that we are facing with climate, with pandemics, with fragility, with war, with food insecurity, and recognize that you cannot solve one without having a holistic view of the total. And so the vision of the bank will be to end poverty in a world, in a livable planet. So the livable planet is very, very important. That's what allows us to address some of these issues. The second thing I'm focused on is to make sure that we are attacking on 5 dimensions. The first one is people, education, health, social distribution schemes. The second one is prosperity, jobs, economic growth, and the like, micro SMEs, financial inclusion. The third one is the planet, and we've talked a little bit about already, mitigation, adaptation, those topics. The fourth is physical infrastructure. We cannot say that we will solve for schools and healthcare, and we will do those, but we won't do planet, or we'll do the planet, and we won't do schools and healthcare. This either-or mentality will not work. And the fifth one is digital, which I think changes the game for all 4 of the first ones. And the final item is to measure progress, output, not input, in terms of the empowerment of women, in terms of jobs for young people, in terms of carbon emissions avoided and the like. So I want to focus the bank on tangible outputs in these areas. The second is capital. We cannot do all this unless we are, first of all, sweating our existing balance sheet as much as we can. And there's a series of steps as part of the G20 capital adequacy framework that I won't bore you with. But let's assume that the governments who are now signing up to subscribe to those, if we all add up well across all the multilateral development banks, maybe we'll get to somewhere between 150 and 200 billion all put together over the next decade. My point is, this is important, but it does not solve for the magnitude of the challenges we face. That is Mia's point about requiring the partnerships with philanthropy and with the private sector. One little thing you should know about the magic of money coming into the capital at the World Bank is that for $1 we get, because we can leverage in the private markets with our AAA sovereign rating, we do actually create a multiplier effect that does not get created by just $1 for $1 that goes into a trust or a philanthropy. So we have the ability to leverage and multiply and do that in a way that does 10, 20, 30-year lending. But Mia's right. That's a proportion of our lending and that of others. We have to find a way to work to extend both the tenor and the pricing, concessional pricing and blended finance to enable a lot of the challenges we're dealing with to happen. If you've got a couple of minutes more, for me, I want to cover 4 things. The first is debt. The world is awash in debt. Emerging markets are struggling with that debt. A few countries have been able to find their way through the restructuring process, as recently as Zambia. We have others who need that help. We need the creditors to get together to get this sorted out and work well. The IMF and the World Bank are working with the creditors. So are India and its presidency of the G20. But we really need a push on that topic. The second one is close to $1.5 trillion a year goes into subsidies, fuel and agriculture, which in many ways are impacting our environment in ways we didn't anticipate that to be when the subsidies were put into place. So that cost of that environment is another $6 trillion. That means $7 trillion a year is going into subsidies and the impact of subsidies. So when we talk about money not being available, I would tell you money is available. The question is, where is it right now? And can it be moved to the right causes while being socially responsible to people who benefit from some of those subsidies? I get it. We need a just transition in energy and elsewhere, but we need to address that point. The third point has to do with, can we find a way through all this to leverage up what we can do as a group and work together? My fear is this issue of either or, and I don't understand the either or. I think a large part of the evolution roadmap the bank was being discussed about had to do with IBRD. A lot of the countries who are not as well off are fearful that is going to come at the cost of their money availability. Please know that is not the case. IDA is IDA. It is there. We need to replenish it. We need the developed world to be even more generous in the next round of IDA replenishment. But IDA is there for you. It will be there for you. IBRD, and which is where all the evolution framework discussion has happened, is very important as well to meet the needs of energy transition and the like. That's work still to be done. But let's focus on what we can control. Subsidies, we can control and work on debt. We should look at, somebody mentioned domestic resource mobilization in an earlier conversation, very important. These are all topics that make sense that we should tackle.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that very rousing call to arms and that long and very precise list of steps that need to be taken. I can see a lot of harmony between the two of you in terms of what you're calling for. I'd now like to turn to the Mayor of Montevideo, Carolina Cosse, from Uruguay, and basically ask you, from the perspective of a mayor who is president of the mayors group around the world, none of these bold plans are going to be implemented without help of local governments. Can you share a few remarks about how you see the situation right now? And you'll be speaking in Spanish, so I'd urge people to get their interpretation if they need that.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Very well. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. I think that the considerations of the Prime Minister of Barbados and the President of the World Bank are very important. Is it working? Okay, I will continue. Thank you. I particularly believe in the need to hurry up, to get a move on, because the mayors of the world, in fact I'd say mayors from all cities, Well, when we see a nice rainy day, well, we see the thousands, millions of people in settlements across the world. Those people have a really bad, terrible day. We're indoors and they're outdoors, and so I think if we want to achieve the SDGs, in order to turn things around, we need to work locally. And in local governments and in city governments, efforts are being made on a daily basis to achieve this reality, working on things like healthcare, gender equality, fighting against poverty. And so, yes, we are on the front line of reality on a daily basis, and people have very close contact with us. So I understand the huge need for cultural changes in order to combat climate change. We need to respond with cultural changes, and these cultural changes need to run through all of us, not just the people serving our populations, but they also need to run through decision makers who have responsibilities. And in terms of this cultural change, I think among the best tools we have in politics is opening up to citizens for participation. We can't call upon a mother in a new home for cultural change when her main concern is saving her son from a panic attack, when it's possible that the house might leak in the rain. So we need to be careful. We need to care for the mother who's caring for her children. And so I think that cultural change is absolutely necessary, and we need to change quickly because the life of our planet is at stake. In the International Union of Cities and Local Governments, we have a pact based around 3 pillars: looking after people, looking after democracy, and looking after the planet. And I think that this is an excellent framework for us to use to work together and make ourselves more robust, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is changing the reality and achieving a better world.
We appreciate that, reminding us about the importance of being in touch with populations, pushing for a cultural change in the way that decisions are made. Well, we've heard a lot of rousing comments. Thank you all very much indeed. I very much indeed hope that the second half of this soccer match, come cricket game, come SDG battle, will be much more encouraging than the first half, because there is indeed so much at stake now. So I'd like to now hand back to the President and say once again, thank you all very much indeed, and best of luck in winning the second half. Thank you. Apologies. As moderator, a slight confusion in my briefing notes. I am now due to announce a musical performance of Baba Mal that will be setting the scene at the end and hopefully inspiring us to think great thoughts. So thank you.
Stegan.
Allah rokkam ko jennomi yeki jude balde malede kame atgaji mi wurde sey labam ledi mi wurde bandirabam yaay Jamano adino jamia faranse brada papinal brada pagandal telefone de tonna nodami Sénégal ledi ngatto mi Dakaro tami nenam eye bayo bayo we need education for all children all over Africa. No more war, no more trouble, no more war, no more suffering, no more war. No more suffering, no more war, no more discrimination. We need peace and love and security for all children all over Africa. Chullo ndey kaare ndey gay kame men made baba baydi baba debbo we need education, we need security, for all children all over Africa. We need a bright future for all our children all over the Sahel of Africa. No more war, no more trouble. Baba yo, baba yo, baba yo, baba, baba yo, baby. Nene yo, nene yo, nene yo, nene yo, baby. Baba yo, baba yo, baba yo, baba, baba yo, baby. Bayo, 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 yeah. Thank you very much.
I thank our distinguished speakers for their insightful contributions, as well as the moderator for expertly guiding the discussion. I also thank Mr. Mal for the musical interlude. That concludes the Setting the Stage segment. Heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, distinguished delegates. We will now begin with the plenary segment of the summit. I invite heads of state and heads of government to deliver statements on behalf of groups of participating states. Before calling on the first speaker, may I remind delegations that statements are limited to 5 minutes. To assist speakers in managing their time, a timing device has been placed on the rostrum. The light will turn yellow when the speaker has 1 minute remaining, which is a signal to the speaker to kindly conclude his or her remarks. Full versions of longer interventions can be submitted to the Secretariat for posting on the SDG Summit website. I appeal to all delegations to strictly observe the time limits in order to allow all inscribed speakers to deliver their statements in the limited time available. I now give the floor to His Excellency Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez, President of the Republic of Cuba, speaking on behalf of the Group of 77 and China.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, I have the honour to take the floor on behalf of the G77 in China. The mid-term review of the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda is taking place in an extremely critical juncture in which developing countries face multiple challenges and an unfair economic order that perpetuates inequalities and poverty. The reports drafted by the Secretary-General contain undeniable figures that reflect quite a bleak reality. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the world had already lost track of and deviated from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We have 250 million people living in conditions of extreme poverty. It looks like hardly a third of countries will manage to reduce their levels of national poverty. We will not eliminate hunger like we agreed to do. On the contrary, currently 735 million people experience chronic hunger. This is a figure that is higher than in 2015. At this rate, we will not achieve any of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and less than half of the targets agreed will be achieved. Aware of this current situation, the G77 in China has given the highest level of priority to this event with a view to putting sustainable development at the heart of the international agenda and providing the necessary political impetus to achieve the 2030 agenda. It is in this spirit that the group has contributed to a political declaration in order to accelerate the implementation of actions and concrete, innovative, transformatory and ambitious measures to guarantee the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is in this context that the group has headed up a global appeal for an urgent overhaul of the international financial architecture that has been shared by a high number of leaders and eminent individuals from across the world. This appeal was also supported by the Secretary-General, who called for correcting historical injustices in the international financial architecture in order to bring the most vulnerable peoples and countries better opportunities and a better future. We must continue to defend the role of the General Assembly in discussing these matters. If we want to ensure that the voice of each nation is listened to and taken account of in their rightful way in global governance. This appeal also involves overhauling sovereign debt with the participation of countries of the South with fair, balanced treatment focused on development. The high cost of loans prevents developing countries from being able to invest in sustainable development. Currently, 25 countries of the Global South dedicate more than 20% of their government's income to servicing their debt alone. At the same time, there is a pressing need for a swift recapitalization of the multilateral development banks with a view to radically improving their loans conditions and being able to satisfy the financial needs of the Global South. In this regard, we call upon the international community to follow up and to support the Secretary-General's proposal to provide stimulus for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals for developing countries in order to greatly increase accessible finance on the long term for development and to align financial flows with the Sustainable Development Goals. Further, we call upon developed countries to finally honour the commitments that have not yet been met in terms of ODA. Excellencies, the climate change agenda must be respected fully, in line with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and its Paris Agreement, defending the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities in line with everyone's different capacities. It is essential to establish more ambitious goals in areas such as mitigation, adaptation, and the means to achieve these things, as well as mobilizing resources by developed countries in order to combat climate change and at the same time to address our development challenges. I call upon developed countries to respect their promises made here to developing countries. And to achieve the 2030 agenda, we need concrete measures in technology and human resources, as well as North-South cooperation in order to foster industrialization and investment in high-quality infrastructure that is reliable and resilient. The international trade system must also be reformed, and we need sustainable supply chains that contribute to the achievement of the SDGs by promoting economic growth focused on export in developing countries. This will strengthen differentiated treatment for countries of the Global South in the multilateral system. Unilateralism, including coercive measures for trade, must be corrected as soon as possible. This is the case of countries that suffer from the imposition of unilateral coercive measures, and these are a grave violation of the principles and aspirations of the United Nations Charter. These measures are a serious stumbling block to the efforts of countries affected when it comes to achieving the SDGs and sustainable development in general. The international community, including the United Nations system, must continue to firmly reject the imposition of these measures and work towards their unconditional elimination. Your Excellencies, the above-mentioned appeals have been made many times by leaders of the Global South. The absence of progress must not lead us to an absence of solutions. These are the actions that are required urgently. We require the political will to ensure that nobody is left behind and to overcome one of the most complex crises that humanity has faced in modern history. This would be our best contribution to our common future, the common future that we need to build together. Thank you very much.
I thank the President of the Republic of Cuba. I now give the floor to His Excellency Azali Azumani, President of the Union of the Comoros, speaking on behalf of the African Union.
Excellences, Monsieur le Président de la...
Excellencies, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Heads of States and Governments, good morning to you all. I'm very pleased to take part in this very important meeting and to share some thoughts with you. That is in my quality as the Acting President of the African Union. 8 years ago, we, Member States of the United Nations, met here to establish and implement the 2030 Agenda towards the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. This summit is a halfway point, and we need it to breathe new life into our actions in order to achieve the objectives that we set out ahead of 2030. We have only achieved 15% of the target set out with respect to the SDGs, and the situation requires significant acceleration of our commitment, collective commitment. We need brave policies, targeted investment and concerted action to transform our aspirations for 2030 into tangible results. The trajectory taken by states on the implementation of the SDGs has been hampered by external shocks in recent years, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the climate crisis. In our continent, Africa, as underscored by the Economic Commission for Africa report, the continent had positive growth rates before the pandemic, but it was insufficient to achieve the SDGs. As well as the pandemic, Africa is facing several challenges which negatively impact the Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063, especially when it comes to peace and security. Nonetheless, the same report demonstrates interdependency links between the 5 pillars of Agenda 2030 and some of those of Agenda 2063, which is very important for the acceleration of the implementation of the SDGs, including those relating to the climate, partnerships, peace and governance. As such, I align myself with the approach of the Secretary-General to encourage states to undertake national commitments as well as global commitments that are robust to promote acceleration, transformation and the implementation of the SDGs. The success of the SDGs will largely depend on the resources that we can mobilize to do so. I therefore call on states to strengthen their national capacities in order to mobilize and ensure the necessary financing for development and for countries of the South to strengthen South-South cooperation too. In this respect, the acceleration of the implementation of the African Free Trade Zone is a topic of the African Union for 2023, and it's a very important opportunity to ensure the perfect African economic integration and to achieve the SDGs by 2030. That is why I would like to propose a positive Africa label for our continent, which recognizes African and international stakeholders that have a positive impact in Africa in line with Agenda 2030, the SDGs, and Agenda 2063 of the African Union. Africa, for its growth, needs also to consider social and environmental factors. Colleagues, the acceleration of the implementation of the SDGs has become a universal challenge. Our global development is at stake, as is our well-being for a sustainable shared future. I thank you.
I thank the President of the Union of the Comoros. I now give the floor to His Excellency Charles Angelo Savarin, President of the Commonwealth of Dominica, speaking on behalf of the Caribbean community.
Your Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Honorable Ministers and Delegates. Mr. President, I am pleased to deliver this statement on behalf of CARICOM, which celebrates 50 years as an establishment and is equally proud to have one of its very own overseeing the activities of the General Assembly at its 78th session. CARICOM pledges its full support to ensuring that your tenure is successful for the greater good of the multilateral process. CARICOM's position on the path towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals has been clearly outlined in several debates and intergovernmental negotiations under the auspices of the United Nations. We firmly believe that a greater commitment, solidarity, and transformative action are needed to achieve the set targets within a realistic time frame. Accordingly, this summit will provide a unique opportunity to fundamentally adjust trajectory of all member states to take positive action towards its implementation. Mr. President, CARICOM endorses the political declaration set out by the Secretary General in a renewed call for all member states to recommit towards this transformative process. The existential threat of COVID-19 over the last 3 years, exacerbated by the impact of climate change and war in Ukraine, calls for even greater leadership at the multilateral level. Therefore, what is required is a surge in commitments for governments and other stakeholders to take implementation of the SDGs to the next level. To this end, decisive action must be taken to better support developing countries through long-term lending at lower interest rates, debt relief, and the creation of a robust and effective sovereign debt resolution mechanism. Mr. President, sanctions issued. Additionally, to outline national budgets with the SDGs pathways, gender equality, empowerment of women and girls, reduction in domestic poverty, access to clean water and sanitation, food and energy security must be prioritized. The use of technology as a transformative tool must be harnessed, and no citizen should be disadvantaged. The 2030 agenda is achievable. There will always be challenges. However, the capacity to overcome the most severe challenges is not an anomaly for humankind. These are indeed unprecedented times. We can draw confidence from the fact that we have access to a wealth of knowledge and resources to meet the demands of the times. Mr. President, CARICOM remains firm in its support for implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I thank you.
I thank the President of the Commonwealth of Dominica. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mogwetsi Eric Kebetswe Masisi, President of the Republic of Botswana, speaking on behalf of the group of landlocked developing countries.
Your Excellency, the President of the 78th Session of the General Assembly, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government here present, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to deliver this statement on behalf of the 32 member countries of the group of landlocked developing countries, the LLDCs. Mr. President, as we gather here today at this critical moment for the LLDCs, which is marked by the midpoint of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, we need not only take stock but also assess our progress regarding the execution of the Vienna Programme of Action. More importantly, we're undertaking a journey to determine the key priorities for the upcoming 10-year Programme of Action ahead of the 3rd United Nations Conference on LLDCs to be held in Kigali, Rwanda in June 2024. While the prospects may seem exhilarating, it is crucial to acknowledge the daunting challenges that our group faces on the road to Kigali and indeed to the year 2030. Mr. President, today we find ourselves confronted by lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, pressing issues of climate change, global macroeconomic challenges, and various other overlapping crises. These challenges continue to derail the hard-earned progress made by the LLDCs towards the attainment of the Vienna Programme of Action goals and the SDGs. This is so because our countries are disadvantaged to fully harness the potential to support sustainable development efforts due to their geographical and structural vulnerabilities to external shocks and low resilience. Mr. President, while facing numerous challenges that aggravate development of LLDCs, some progress has been made in the implementation of the Vienna Programme of Action, though mixed and uneven across various regions. The advancement made in the implementation of the Vienna Programme of Action to enhance and modernize transportation and ICT infrastructure is highly promising. In the region where I come from, for example, my country, Botswana, in collaboration with the government of Zambia, have constructed the amazing Ganzugula Bridge, which is a rail line and one-stop border component. Through this project, we have significantly reduced the turnaround time that trucks take to transport goods from the south to the north and vice versa. However, it is essential to recognize that other areas, in particular international trade, which is the engine for inclusive economic growth, remains marginal and undiversified within the LLDCs. Furthermore, we cannot overlook the sharp increase in debt crisis that has plunged many of our countries, particularly as half of the LLDCs are categorized as least developed countries. In this connection, a lot remains to be achieved in many areas for this group of countries. The upcoming LLDC conference, therefore, gives us hope and offers a unique opportunity for us to adopt new transformative roadmap for the LLDCs to overcome these crises and build back better while accelerating the achievement of the SDGs. As this new program of action for LDCs will largely overlap with the final period of pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals, we anticipate that its level of ambition will reflect our commitment as a global community to ensure that LLDCs are not left further behind in achieving sustainable development. We look forward to creating the widest possible coalition of strengthened global partnerships that will bring about transformative change to the lives of more than 564 million people in the world's 32 landlocked countries. Therefore, as I stand here today, I implore all stakeholders, including our development partners, the United Nations, international financiers, and other organizations, as well as the private sector, to join hands in finding sustainable and lasting solutions to these countries in special needs. In conclusion, the LLDCs would like to reaffirm their determination and full commitment to attain the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. I'd like also to seize this moment to once again emphasize our appeal to the active engagement of all stakeholders in the third UN Conference on LLDCs, preferably at the highest level possible. I look forward to meeting you, Excellencies, in Kigali, Rwanda in June 2024. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the President of the Republic of Botswana, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Sir Angel Whips, President of the Republic of Palau, speaking on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Developing States.
Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I deliver this statement in my capacity as chair of the 12 small island developing states represented in New York, and we are aligning ourselves with the statement to be delivered by Samoa on behalf of the AOSIS. On behalf of the PSIDs, I extend our congratulations to His Excellency Mr. Dennis Francis on assuming the presidency of the 78th session of the General Assembly, and assure you of the full support of the Pacific SIDs in your successful execution of your mandate over the next 12 months. Mr. President, our continued existence depends on our capacity to unite as a global, unified community. In this juncture, the need for multilateralism to be strengthened is not merely advisable, but imperative. The achievement of the SDGs must be at the center of our collective efforts over the next 7 years. Together, we must rise to the challenges and elevate our actions with urgency to confront the climate crisis, leaving positive impact on our environment, societies, and economies for present and future generations. The Pacific SID's commitment to sustainable development and resilience of our countries and peoples remains unwavering. However, COVID-19 and climate change have impaired and even reversed our hard-fought development gains. Our endeavors are frequently impeded by escalating costs associated with natural disasters, the human and physical cost of climate change, and our limitation and lack of access to concessional financing. Significant limitations to accessing financing hinders our abilities to allocate funds to effectively implement our development priorities, including the Samoa Pathway and other crucial development activities. We support the follow-up and review of the financing developing outcomes, in particular, the reform of the international financial institution to support the means of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Nonetheless, we continue to persist in our efforts to meet the SDGs, as they provide the best hope for a brighter and more sustainable future. SIDS face a unique set of vulnerabilities which hinders our ability to achieve sustainable development. Structural factors, including size, remoteness, and exposure to global economic, social, and political environmental shocks, impact socio-economic outcomes of our ability to achieve the SDGs. These vulnerabilities were further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and with many SIDS countries being particularly affected by the drop in international tourism and remittances. The sudden economic shock exposed the fragility of our economies and the urgent need for tailored solutions to address our unique circumstances. Thus, the call for and the endorsement of a multi-dimensional vulnerability index an MVI, which will allow for inclusion of more than just income-based criteria to assess eligibility for concessional finance, comes at the right moment. And we ask for the support of the international community on this key issue. Mr. President, the slow progress on the SDGs achieved by the SIDS to date is an indication that losses linked to vulnerability far outweighs the development gains. There is a clear necessity for building genuine partnerships and cooperation to provide financial support and technical support. We call for the effective and durable partnerships and scaled-up climate finance that adequately recognize the context of the SIDS and the respect for regional and national policy coordination mechanisms and systems. Moreover, we call on partners to improve partnerships around data and statistics for monitoring and evaluation, digital infrastructure and transformation, SDI, and sustainable and predictable financing and capacity building. Mr. President, we need to remind ourselves of the commitments and the undertakings we made towards the full implementation of the Samoa Pathway. And we support the call to develop a robust monitoring framework for the Samoa Pathway aligned with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and other intergovernmental agreements, including the Sendai Framework and the Paris Agreement, as these commitments reflect our shared responsibility to leave no one behind and to build a more just and equitable future for all. After all, it is of vital importance that each one of us demonstrates the unwavering boldness and courage that is required. Thank you. God bless. Oman Msulang.
I thank the President of the Republic of Palau, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, speaking on behalf of the group of 7+ member states.
Mr. President, Secretary General, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to deliver the statement on behalf of the group of 7+ countries at this high-level summit convened at the midpoint of implementing the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, a critical juncture characterized by recovery from COVID-19 pandemic, ongoing geopolitical tensions, and environmental threats. The 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, the agreed global plan for sustainable development, adopted in 2015, was conceived to leave no one behind in countries around the world and support global public goods related to peace, environmental protection, and an inclusive global economy. The G7+ comprised of countries affected or recovering from conflict were among the principal advocates of the SDGs, particularly Goal 6, which is about promoting peace, inclusive societies, providing access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. As a group of countries, we have collectively learned from our experiences that sustainable peace, effective state institutions, and access to justice are key pillars to stability, development, and resilience. However, since the start of the implementation of this global blueprint, fragile and conflict-affected states are the farthest behind in meeting SDGs, and this dilemma only worsened with the advent of COVID-19 pandemic and other global crises, including the triple planetary crisis and food insecurity. Mr. President, against this backdrop, the member states of the G7+ recommend the undermentioned as the possible pathway toward the realization of transforming our world and leaving no one behind in this decade of action. Firstly, promoting peace and stability should continue to be central to implementing the SDGs, as violence and insecurity undermine development gains. In advancing the development agenda, we must seek to promote and support peace efforts that address the root causes of conflicts and tackle economic and social inequalities and exclusion, especially in countries contending with high levels of threat, fragility that require heightened attention. Secondly, resilience should be one of the guiding principles to achieve the SDGs. In this age of complex crises, we must deliberately embrace resilience as it helps to ensure progress is not derailed or reversed in times of adversity. For instance, ending extreme poverty and thriving in complex and adverse environments require building capacities, mechanisms, and institutions to promote a sustainable future for all. This is why the G7+, we continue to advocate for debt financing, debt relief, and technology transfer for the least developed and conflict-affected countries. Debt financing and relief for our respective countries would unleash the resources that could be utilized to realize the ambition of Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. Thirdly and lastly, we call for a joint commitment by development partners to work through and support government-led country platforms in conflict-affected and fragile countries to enhance development cooperation by addressing complex political, social, and economic realities. While we acknowledge the trend of support for country platforms over the last 5 years, it is imperative to raise the awareness for governments and partners to embrace this collaborative, risk-informed, and flexible mechanism. It ensures that development agendas are localized. I will conclude, Mr. President, by stating that meeting SDGs in this decade of action could be challenging, but sustained multilateral support to a holistic national ownership of the 17 SDGs, distinct global leadership, resource mobilization, capacity building, and mutual accountability, specific progress can be envisaged and achieved with appropriate scale. Thank you.
I thank the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Peter Pavel, President of the Czech Republic, speaking on behalf of Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of 46 member states, members of the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies. In 2015, this body made a promise that we would adopt and act on a transformative agenda for people, the planet, and prosperity through 17 Sustainable Development Goals. 8 years later, we have much to live up to. Yet there is still no better blueprint for a more peaceful and prosperous world than the 2030 Agenda, and no greater catalyst for the change needed than SDG 16+. We know that we are living in the midst of cascading and intersecting crises. Halfway through the 2030 Agenda, advancing peace, justice, equality, and inclusion is critical to mitigating the impact of these crises and to delivering the requisite policy solutions to fulfill our promises. Amidst global polarization and distrust, we need to rebuild the social contract between people and national and international institutions. In supporting the Secretary General's call to fast-track SDG implementation, allow me to highlight some of Pathfinder's work across peace, justice, equality, and inclusion. While conflict-related violence has increased, we know that approximately 80% of violent deaths occur outside conflict zones, and that governments and the civil society have made real progress in reducing violence in such contexts. In this connection, the Pathfinder's Halving Global Violence Task Force will launch its flagship report in 2024, amplifying proven solutions to advancing peace at all levels, while highlighting the social and economic costs of violence. We must act on SDG 16's pledge to reduce violence in all its forms on the battlefield and in our homes and streets. Equal access to justice for all is a critical enabler for sustainable development. We need to put people at the center, with justice systems designed to address what people really need when they look for justice solutions, with services that help them achieve fair outcomes. To support this, a number of member states and partners have come together to form the Justice Action Coalition, a high-ambition, multi-stakeholder coalition that promotes people-centered justice and calls on all justice actors, including young justice leaders, to join us in our quest to close the global justice gap. Finally, the promise to leave no one behind lies at the very heart of the SDG agenda. Yet, since the adoption of the agenda, inequality within and among countries has risen dramatically. The Pathfinders provide evidence-based solutions in areas as social protection, housing, taxation, inclusive green transitions, and the avoidance of divisive political narratives, demonstrating that change is possible. The 2023 SDG Summit represents a critical moment to change the trajectory of the SDGs and SDG 16+. We cannot fail in this effort. Trust in our domestic institutions and in multilateralism depends on it. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now briefly switch to my national capacity. In 2015, the leaders agreed to improve people's lives and make our planet a better place. Unfortunately, 8 years later, the 2030 SDGs implementation is in deep trouble. After the COVID-19 pandemics, the world is facing devastating effects of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Apart from tremendous human suffering, it is also causing widespread food and energy crises. Russia's reprehensible actions have a direct impact on SDGs implementation, not only in the most affected region, but also globally. Today, we gathered to recommit our ambitions to accelerate our efforts to achieve the SDGs until 2030. Czechia is fully aware of its global responsibility. We will continue to enhance the strategic planning to make it even more effective and avoid overlaps and inconsistency. We are also fully committed to implement the Paris Agreement, and we pledge to contribute $4 million to the Green Climate Fund for the period 2024 to 2027. To promote good governance and policymaking based on evidence, we pledge to establish an open data national platform for monitoring and reporting the SDGs indicators. The implementation of the SDG 16 remains one of the priorities of the Czech foreign policy. To reach our common goal in 2030, we urgently need to highlight a link between peace, justice, security, climate and environment, development, human rights, and strong institutions. Czechia will continue to support our partner countries through bilateral and multilateral development projects, humanitarian assistance, and transformation policy. No one should be left behind. Thank you.
I thank the President of the Czech Republic and now give the floor to His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola, speaking on behalf of the Southern African Development Community.
Excellency Dennis Francis, President of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Excellency Antonio Guterres, Excellency Paula Narvaez, President of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, distinguished heads of state and government, heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to take the floor as chairperson in office of the Southern African Development Community at what I consider to be a crucial opportunity to together examine the progress made in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals at the level of the different regions represented at this summit. This is a time when the assessment we make of our performance will allow us to take steps to correct or rectify anything that we feel has not been done in the most appropriate way. We need to make this summit of ours a real turning point for a more dynamic, committed, and engaged approach with a view to strengthening our political commitment and mobilizing the will to help make progress in areas whose results will be positively reflected in improving the general living conditions of our populations. Excellencies, the SADC region has made remarkable progress in implementing the regional cooperation and integration priorities outlined in the organization's Vision 2050 and the Indicative Regional Development Strategic Plan 2020-2030. We must also recognize that a number of constraints stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and other factors, including the instability that has affected some countries in the region, have had a considerable negative impact on the ability of countries to more effectively carry out strategic plans aimed at deepening the regional integration of Southern Africa and promoting its development, with a view to achieving the ambitions of the Africa we want set out in the African Union's Agenda 2063. Our progress could have been more significant and more expressive if we hadn't had to deal with the global crises and others specific to our region, which force us to divert our attention from the central development issues to deal with them. In addition, it is always worth mentioning that the difficulties in accessing financial resources in conditions that are affordable for our economies represents another side of the problem, perhaps the biggest, that we are constantly facing in order to carry out essential projects in areas that are crucial to boosting our development, on which the creation of conditions that favor the necessary and urgent change in the picture and indicators of poverty that are currently observed in our countries naturally depends. Nothing in the plans, objectives, and programs that we have outlined over the years can be achieved effectively and with the positive results that we all want to see if we don't make a coordinated effort to eliminate the conflicts, instability, insecurity, and unpredictability that discourage investment and deprive our markets of the credibility they need for our international partners to invest more in our economies. We are aware of the interdependent relationship that exists between peace and development, and as a result, the Republic of Angola, in its capacity as chairperson of SADC, will continue to develop actions with a view to the future realization of SADC's Vision 2050, which envisages a region with political and social stability, peace, and economic development and justice, as well as freedom for its citizens. These objectives, which are specific to our region and are also shared by our international partners, will be achievable with a joint effort among all of us, but with far fewer constraints and obstacles if the relationship between our region and the international community develops without unilateral coercive measures against SADC member states, as in the case of Zimbabwe. Excellencies, the Southern African region, as we have been observing, has been subjected to the consequences of climate change with all the harmful effects this has on the region's economies. It's easy to realize, for the reasons I've just mentioned, that we are highly sensitive to this problem, and so I want to stress the need to implement the international climate change agenda and fulfill the promises made by developed countries to make financial resources available so that with some other complementary resources we can ensure the financing of the adaptation by 2025 in order to achieve the objective of recapitalizing the Green Climate Fund. I would like to end by stressing the importance of global cooperation, solidarity, and joint action in order to tackle the multiple and complex challenges facing the world today. And I therefore call on the United Nations General Assembly to put these goals at the top of its agenda for the foreseeable future. Thank you very much.
I thank the President of the Republic of Angola and now give the floor to Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the Commission of the European Union.
Madam President, Secretary General, Excellencies, my generation was raised with the idea that our children and grandchildren would be better off than us. But a cascade of crises has now set back progress towards our sustainable development goals. First the pandemic, then Russia's war of aggression with its devastating impact for global food and energy security. All of this with the knock-on effects of a boiling planet. Against this backdrop, developing countries do need more resources to pull people out of poverty and to transition towards a clean and equal economy. And this is why I welcome the Secretary General's SDG stimulus plan. In 2022, Europe elevated its development aid to 93 billion euros, an increase of 30% over the previous year. And today, we account for over 40% of the global assistance. We know our obligations. But public funding alone is not enough. We must explore all avenues to attract new funding towards developing countries, and first and foremost there is the reform of the MDBs, without any question. But let me focus on two ways in which we are answering the Secretary General's call. First, we have to unlock private capital. With our Global Gateway Investment Plan, Europe is investing 300 billion euros in developing economies in the next 5 years, in renewable energy, in stronger healthcare systems, in quality education, green transport, and of course, digital solutions. This is about equipping our partners with the resources, the technologies, and the skills to move up the value chain, to create jobs for their citizens, and to protect the environment. We're doing so by using a portion of our public budget to de-risk private investments. And we're taking this further. We're also supporting developing and emerging economies to create their own green bond markets in order to attract even more fresh capital towards the Sustainable Development Goals. My second point is carbon pricing. Carbon pricing is one of the most efficient and effective climate policies. Carbon pricing fosters innovation by the private sector. It makes polluters pay a fair price on carbon and their carbon emissions, while cutting emissions, and the revenues can support the clean transition in developing countries. Let me give you a few figures. Last year alone, Europe's carbon pricing system raised 38 billion euros, and we are reinvesting 100% of it in climate action. But if you look at the global greenhouse gas emissions, only 20% are covered by carbon pricing. Now just imagine the global impact in terms of new revenues while cutting greenhouse gas emissions if more countries adopted this strategy and would introduce a carbon pricing and dedicate a fair share of their revenues to developing countries and emerging markets. Ladies and gentlemen, we must double down our efforts and have the courage of creative solutions. Let's work together to restore the promise that tomorrow will be better than today for all people on this planet. Thank you very much.
I thank the President of the Commission of the European Union, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Pushpa Kamal Dahal, Prime Minister of Nepal, speaking on behalf of the Group of Least Developed Countries.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I thank you, Madam President, for convening this SDG summit. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the group of the least developed countries. Madam President, halfway to 2030 deadline, we are seriously off track in achieving SDGs. The global crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and geopolitical tension are further pushing out hard-earned progress into peril. According to the UN Secretary General's SDG report, more than half of the world is left behind, most from LDCs. The SDGs are in dire need of a rescue plan. We all know 12 of the 17 goals and at least 18 of the 169 targets refer explicitly to LDCs, recognizing the importance of addressing their development challenges. And yet, foreign direct investment flows to LDCs saw a decline of about 30% in 2022 as compared to 2021. Investment in infrastructure, renewable energy, water and sanitation, food security, health and education suffered a significant blow. The average external debt of LDCs rose from 41% in 2011 to 54% in 2022. The high cost of borrowing facing these countries has not only inhibited investment in SDGs, but also raised the risk of debt crisis. However, we have not lost our faith, nor have we derailed our commitment. We have continued to make maximum effort to strengthen and mobilize our domestic resource and institutions. But acting alone will not be enough. Commitment and support of international community for adoption of Doha Program of Action was significant. More investment in people, support for structural transformation, and achieving rapid and sustainable recovery from COVID pandemic will be necessary for achieving SDGs. Massive scaling up of affordable finance to LDCs, including through the SDG stimulus package, is crucial. Addressing the debt distress of LDCs by 2025 and providing coordinated and appropriate debt solution in a timely manner must remain an urgent priority. We also urge the developed countries to scale up and fulfill their commitment to providing 0.7% of GNP as ODA to developing countries and 0.15 to 0.20% to the LDCs. This is critical as finance is the fuel that drives the SDG progress, and the achievement of SDG in LDCs defines its success or failure. Madam President, speaking in my national capacity, I would like to share with this august gathering that materializing SDG is Nepal's top development priority. The SDGs have been integrated into our national policy and plan. We are committed to eradicating poverty and reducing inequality in the line with 2030 agenda and the principle of leaving no one behind. We remain committed to ensuring a smooth, sustainable, and irreversible graduation from LDC category by 2026. Our commitment to the Paris Agreement is steadfast, and so is our goal to reach net zero scenario by 2045. We call for adequate support from our development partners to complement our national efforts. To conclude, we must ensure that this summit renews and revitalizes our SDG promises. We must reinvigorate the sense of hope and optimism and accelerate action for achieving 2030 agenda. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
I thank the Prime Minister of Nepal, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency Fiame Naomi Mataafa, Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade of the independent state of Samoa, speaking on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States.
Madam President, Your Excellencies, It's an honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. Our recently concluded preparatory meetings for the 4th International Conference on SDGs affirms the unwavering commitment of SDGs to implementing the 2030 Agenda as we chart a 10-year plan for a resilient and prosperous future for our peoples. We recognize that the journey for us will be tough and daunting at times, but we are prepared and have a strong resolve to achieve this. However, we do also recognize and acknowledge that we cannot do this on our own. Climate change, the global financial crisis, COVID-19 pandemic, and geopolitical tensions have taught us that we are even more closely connected than we wish to acknowledge. If we are going to uphold and deliver our strong commitment to leave no one behind and reaching the furthest behind first, we will have to leave nationalism behind and urgently put action to the rhetoric that we have been propagating for the past 8 years. Faced with continuous and multiple crises, and without the ability to address these in any substantial and sustainable way, we need to take urgent action on the climate change front. More climate financing, drastic cuts and reduction in greenhouse emissions. 1.5 is non-negotiable. Everyone is feeling the mighty impacts. COP28 needs to be a game changer. Results must emanate from it. Loss and damage funds needs to be fully operationalized and financed. We need progressive movement from the global stocktake, and state parties need to enhance NDCs. Second, undertake urgent reform of the governance structure and overall working of the international finance architecture. It is time for change. We need a system that would be able to respond more appropriately to the varied dynamics countries face today, that go beyond GDP, that considers various vulnerabilities and other aspects, that would look to utilize the Multi-Dimensional Vulnerability Index, Bridgetown Initiative, and all other measures that facilitate a more holistic and comprehensive insight into a country's true circumstances. This reform must also allow for more inclusive participation and decision-making. Finally, urgently address high indebtedness in SDGs. This can no longer be ignored. There needs to be a concerted effort to address this. We continually find ourselves in a revolving door between debt and recurring debt due to our continuous and constant response to economic, environmental, and social shocks caused by external factors. AOSIS is ready to be bold and focused on how we approach the next 7 years to achieve the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs. We believe we can do this together as the international community. We must begin to earnestly address our global development issues if we are going to begin speaking of a summit of the future and for future generations. The sad reality, if we don't take care of today, for many of us, there will be no tomorrow. In closing, Madam President, I appeal to you all to take a pause and let us join forces to make 2030 a year that we can all be proud of. Be assured that AOSIS will be there making our contribution. We are fully committed. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade of the independent state of Samoa, and now give the floor to His Excellency Alexei Uverchuk, Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, speaking on behalf of the country's members of the Eurasian Economic Union that are Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and the Russian Federation.
Distinguished President, heads of states and governments, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of member states of the EAEU, and in my quality as the representative of the presiding state of EAEU bodies for 2023, I'd like to provide information about how the development of processes of economic integration within the EAEU facilitate the achievement by EAEU member states of the SDGs. The EAEU is an economic integration regional association, and it ensures the freedom of movement of goods, services, capital and workforce. The main challenge of the EAEU is to improve the well-being of citizens of its member states. To this end, we work to form common EAEU markets in spheres of cooperation without exceptions or restrictions. Cooperation is a source for development of economies of countries that participate in them, and it is an additional factor that facilitates the achievement of the SDGs. EAEU member states note positive trends in their achievement of the SDGs in fields that fall under the scope of the EAEU. A significant influential factor on indicators of the SDGs comes from the EAEU's guarantees of the freedom of movement of goods. Citizens of our states experience practical advantages of the EAEU's freedom of movement of workforce. For those who work in EAEU member states, they do not need to receive a work permit or validation of education documents if they are issued in EAEU member states. Our states form a single service market. Around 50% of the full volume of services provided within the EAEU are provided under unified laws, and this number is increasing. To ensure the freedom of movement of capital in member states, we discussed the gradual harmonisation of national legislation in the field of regulating financial markets. A meaningful contribution to the achievement of the SDGs in EAU member states comes from digital agendas of the EAU and its digital projects. Achievement of the SDGs is largely related to the effectiveness of implementing the climate agenda too, and our 5 states understand the importance of comprehensive access to sustainable and modern sources of energy and undertaking measures to combat climate change. We formed a bank of climate technologies and digital initiatives, including on carbon footprint accounting. We've also established a list of criteria for green projects for EAU member states. We support equal dialogue of integration structures, and we see this as a guarantee for more effective functioning of the global economic architecture. We also highly value attention paid to issues of regional cooperation by the UN, its regional commissions and the UN system. We are interested in studying the best global practice on reforming areas of the economy that focus on achieving the SDGs, which is especially important given the upcoming establishment of a strategy for the future development of the EAEU. Achieving the SDGs is a common matter which we need to pool our efforts for and mobilise existing resources and that's all participants of the international community. In my national capacity, I'd like to note the following. We agree with the disappointing assessments by the UN Secretariat on progress of achieving the SDGs. We think a reason for this is the USA and the European Union's miscalculations in macroeconomic policy during the pandemic, as well as forced screening of economies without considering the social effect of measures for decarbonisation and their economic effectiveness, and a lack of desire of donors to implement their obligations towards developing states. The negative effect has been increased by the policy of illegitimate unilateral sanctions, which receive undeservedly little attention in UN discussions. As such, developing countries have become hostages of this situation. Russia, despite pressure, continues to be a responsible provider of food, fertilizer and energy resources. We understand their importance for developing countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America and the Middle East in a context of improving relevant SDG indicators. We are sure that further progress in ensuring food and energy security will largely depend on strengthening international partnerships, the demonopolization of markets for relevant services, and the creation of alternative systems for payments, insurance, transport, and logistics. On the implementation of Agenda 2030 in our country, its provisions are integrated into our national legislation. On each SDG, Russia in recent years has demonstrated positive momentum, and we intend to achieve progress on 3 aspects of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. There are still challenges whose solution require the joint efforts on the basis of respectful dialogue between states based on the sovereign equality of all states of the international community and respect of the UN Charter. The full statement on behalf of the EAU and my national capacity will be provided to the UN for publication.
Russian Federation, and now give the floor to Her Excellency Retno Marsudi, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, speaking on behalf of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Madam President, I'm pleased to deliver a statement on behalf of the ASEAN member states. ASEAN is strongly committed to achieve the SDGs in our region. We will continue to promote, in complementarities with ASEAN Community Vision 2025, including in our work toward ASEAN Community Vision 2045. In this ever-challenging and uncertain global environment, we are committed to strengthen our resilience and capabilities. Allow me to highlight ASEAN efforts in advancing this commitment. First, we remain steadfast in our work to narrowing development gap, enhancing SDGs localization, while empowering youth, women, elderly persons, MSMEs, and migrant workers. Second, we commit to achieve a resilient ASEAN community and work together to increase investment in human resources development, improving regional health architecture, and to better prepare for future pandemic. At the same time, furthering effort to build resilient regional economic architecture supported by digital transformation, resilient supply chain, and sustainable energy security. We also reaffirm our support to the strengthening of multilateralism with the UN at its core by solidifying adherence to the principle of the UN Charter. And we emphasize our resolve to bring the trajectory of SDGs implementation back to track. Madam President, let me speak on my national capacity. The current global order is simply unfit to provide equal opportunity for the Global South. As a result, we are tremendously off track to meet the SDGs by 2030. We have no other option other than to create conducive environment where developing countries can grow and make developmental leaps. We need to put an end to trade discrimination. The Global South must have the opportunity to develop downstream industry. As ASEAN chair this year, Indonesia set the foundation for ASEAN to be the regional hub for EV and battery manufacture, to play bigger role in global supply chain, to foster green economy, and to make Southeast Asia as an epicentrum of growth. Madam President, our target for 2030 is imminent. We need a renewed sense of focus and determination, and the time is now. I thank you very much.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, and now give the floor to Her Excellency Alicia Bárcena Ibarra, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Mexico, speaking also on behalf of Indonesia, the Republic of Korea, Turkey, and Australia, MICTA.
It is my honor, Madam President, to deliver this statement on behalf of MICTA members,
Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, Australia, and my own country, Mexico. 10 years ago, in the sidelines of the 68th UN General Assembly, our 5 countries agreed to establish a platform to foster cross-regional dialogue, boost mutual understanding, identify avenues for cooperation, and promote an inclusive and resilient world. We emphasize the importance of a strong and coordinated response to current challenges, both at regional and global levels. Thanks to its participation in forums such as G20, WTO, and the UN, MICTA has given special attention to foster effective, transparent, and inclusive and people-oriented multilateralism. At the halfway point of Agenda 2030, MICTA is really concerned that the world is off track in the progress to achieve SDGs. Therefore, the SDG Summit presents a key opportunity to consolidate a global pledge to propel efforts towards the accomplishment of the 2030 Agenda as the globally agreed blueprint for sustainable future. MICTA members reiterate their commitment to promote sustainable development worldwide and to achieve the 2030 Agenda. And as such, our 5 countries have presented their voluntary national reviews demonstrating the unwavering support to SDG progress. Furthermore, the group recognizes the valuable contributions of multi-stakeholders such as civil society, academia, parliaments, and the private sector and local governments. Therefore, we will continue to open spaces for their continuous engagement. MICTA believes that individual efforts will not be sufficient to overcome the obstacles that stem from current crisis. Only coordinated actions can translate into constructive and effective solutions. Thanks to its cross-regional membership and its potential areas of economic development, MICTA is well placed to act as a bridge builder to create synergies that propel the value of circular and creative economies to channel the contributions of people. The achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls is a core priority of MICTA. Our group reaffirms its support for increased international cooperation to achieve SDGs, including working together to mobilize all sources of financing for development and to bridge capacities gaps needed to achieve Agenda 2030. MICTA underscores the need for affordable, adequate, and accessible financing from all sources, in particular harnessing the potential of innovative financing, particularly from the private sector, blended finance, investment, and SDG-linked bonds. Before concluding, Madam President, we reiterate that SDGs will remain at the core of our agenda. Hence, MICTA reiterates its commitment to strengthen our cooperation within and beyond our membership to mobilize collective efforts and to foster collaboration with a clear objective of leaving no one behind. Let me turn to my Mexican capacity for a moment and turn to Spanish, by the way. Mexico tiene un índice.
Mexico has a 69.7% level of compliance according to the United Nations 2023 report. For 5 years in Mexico, we have placed the well-being of people at the very heart of public policy, thanks to the combat against corruption and better efficiencies in public spending and an increase in revenue without increasing taxation. Today, 7 in every 10 households receive support through social programs such as universal pensions for the elderly, grants for students, and support to increase production in the countryside. 2 examples: the Sembrando Vida program with a the $5 billion rather to provide vocational training and support for food self-sufficiency with planting support. We also have the Youth Building the Future program, which is providing support for work opportunities, and more than $5 billion have been invested in this program, and more than 2.6 million young people have been provided vocational training, because we in Mexico cannot achieve things without our youth. The government's policy for employment has increased the minimum wage by 90% in real terms and has enabled to lift more than 5 million Mexican people out of poverty. We are addressing the most pressing SDG, bring people out of poverty. This is the commitment of President López Obrador, and in 1 month we will be calling the National Convention on the 2030 Agenda with the Secretariat for the Economy, and we will continue to mobilise our domestic resources, and we are launching an appeal to increase finance and support within the international financial architecture to address debt and special drawing rights for countries of the Global South, middle-income countries and small island developing states. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Mexico. The forum has heard the last speaker in the plenary segment and has thus completed the program of work for this meeting. The meeting is adjourned.